remember that there is light out there. We sometimes have to be the light for our students. And so it's important, what was it? Ruby Payne, in our session last night, one of our participants brought up Ruby Payne and understanding the cycle of poverty and so forth. And one of the things from Ruby Payne is, you can only give what you have. And so if we don't have the light, if we don't have that, that something to bring to our students and give to them, then they don't get it. And so we have to take care of ourselves. We have to find that light, and make sure that we are able to bring that to our students in our community that we serve. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and do one thing real quick. I'm going to stop share, and I have to switch screens. So bear with me for a second. Okay, there we go. Okay. And let me go back to share again. Yep, I've done this one or two times. There we go. All right, so hopefully now you are seeing our screen here, but you're not seeing me. Now, don't worry about that. I'm not important. But tonight's session is Racing Up, and this is all about talking about race in the classroom. I don't know if anybody has, kind of been watching the news or, been outside lately, but race has kind of been a thing of late. And talking about it is not the easiest thing in the world, particularly in the context of not the politics of the communities we live in, the policies in the school districts that we work in. And there's so many different facets that make this a real challenging point. But I think it is important that we address it. Not only has it been with us since the inception of our country, it really, I'll just use the word infests. It infests every aspect of our culture and that which we know and that we're conscious of and that what we're not conscious of. And so I think it's really important that we address this. Let me introduce you tonight, our presenters. And we have Reese Colbert and Carrie Roberts. Reese, where are you coming from right now tonight?
Actually, I'm a Midwesterner normally, but I am actually coming to you tonight from New Orleans. I am here in the great state of Louisiana yes, I told you, Carrie, you'd be here, as a presenting for the ESP conference.
All right, thank you. And we also have Carrie, who is also in New Orleans. So we are really coming from the cradle of culture, and maybe not the best of internet service, but they have good food and music. Let me say good evening to you, Carrie. How are you?
I'm well. I'm living life down here in New Orleans. I'm usually in Washington State. So here celebrating my nominee status as ESP of the Year. So that's pretty cool. And I'll be presenting as well.
I will point out, before we get too far into it, as you can see, Aris and Carrie are members just like you. And that is what makes this type of professional learning platform so powerful. It is peer-led. And so it's not folks who are out on the mountaintop or sitting in some ivory tower, on some campus somewhere or wrote, not that that's not good and important, but when you have folks who are right there at the ground level, who can bring you like the real skinny, the real techniques, the real experience, that is what I've always found to be the most valuable professional learning ever. So without ado, go ahead and take it away, Iris. Carrie, go ahead and introduce yourselves. Let's get this thing going.
All right, thank you, Chad. And we're going to get started by going into the next slide and jumping right in.
This is just about the NEA mission statement that, Chad has done a great job pumping it up, that we're here to address professional issues for all of our members. That's ESP and CERT members. Can you go to the next slide, please? It is important to start and ground our work always by acknowledging the land within which we exist. It's important also to not just give a land acknowledgement to just get through it, but you need to have personalization. You need to know about the tribes within which the lands you're dwelling on. I'm going to start by reading this, and then I'll share about the tribal lands I'm from. We begin by acknowledging that all of us participating on this call reside, work, and are meeting on the traditional lands served by America's First People. We honor America's First Peoples and all elders, past, present, and emerging. And we are called on to learn and share what we learn about the tribal history, cultures, and contributions that have been suppressed in telling the story of America. I'm Carrie Roberts. I come from the lands of the Suquamish and the Port Gallim-S'Klallam tribes in Washington on the Kitsap Peninsula. The Point Elliott Treaty granted the lands to these tribes, and they have spent many decades building connections with communities only to have it harmed and torn apart by the murder of one of their tribal members. And I bring this up because it's an important part of history in my community, and to also demonstrate why it's important for you to understand the relationships of the tribes and the communities within which you live and work. 3 years ago, there was a member who was shot by the police. The tribes and the city used to have a very great, a working connection until this happened. And it's been very contentious for the last 3 years. Recently, they have come to an agreement where the city of Paulsbo is going to pay the family of Chief Stonechild for the loss of life that they caused. And it's important, while it's a money amount, it is important to know that with this comes the acknowledgement and the seeing of the importance of Native lives, as well as training our first responders when they come in to be culturally aware of what is going on, and to be aware of mental health issues, and to be aware of drug and addiction issues, and not just walk into something and assume that the other individual is causing harm. And so that is the piece that I wanted to share with you. And thank you for dropping in the link, Chad. I appreciate that. If you don't know what lands you're from, you can click on that link, and you'll put your zip code in, and you can see a map, and it will tell you where you're from. And this is the NEA mission, to advocate. That's what it is, for education and needs of our members. Here's our slide with our contact information. Sadly, Andrew is not with us. It's so sad. He's amazing. You would have loved meeting him. But here's how to contact me. And next slide, please.
And yeah, I was going to say, and I didn't get a chance to introduce myself either. I actually am an instructional coach who's now an equity coach in my school district, and I'm excited to be here with all of you. As I mentioned before, I am a native Midwesterner, so being down here in the Crescent City is a good time. So into the chat. You've already introduced yourselves, but we would like you to focus in on that bottom question or statement. Conversations about race are important because, and if you would just complete that sentence, we'd like to see what your thoughts or thinking happen to be about this particular topic.
So what is it about having conversations about race that is important? So what are your thoughts now as we begin this learning journey together? Just pop them in the chat so we can hear a little bit about where we are as a community to start the time together.
We're going to have us practice our wait time tonight, Carrie. Here we go.
I just figured it was my internet connection here.
Or that shared internet connection. They're starting to pop in. Thank you. Thank you. Getting to see them now.
Oh, too many people take privilege for granted. Class discussions. You're right. You need to be skilled to handle those class discussions.
V mentioned that it impacts all aspects of life,
Yep.
intergenerational memories and hopes.
Mm-hmm. Oh, white supremacy cultures literally and figuratively killing us all. Yes. Help us build empathy.
And compassion and understanding. A couple more before we move to the next slide.
Respect and see each other for where they come from. need to be aware of our biases and learn how to manage them. That is spot on right there.
And Scott mentions, of course, that it's important for everyone. That's a great way to end that piece. So to get us moving tonight, we're going to share some community agreements we're asking you to embrace as we dig a little deeper into our topics tonight. So we're going to ask you to stay engaged. You notice that, again, we're going to engage you as well in the chat. And when we can, we're going to ask you to, pop in to the space and put your voice into the space. Speak your truth. Might get uncomfortable at times, but we want you to lean in that and not disengage. And then recognize that in an hour and a half, there's no way we're going to have all the solutions. So recognize that we're going to have some non-closure, and we'll still have some things to think about. So this is our first set. We're going to talk about the last three that we have to share about our community agreements. So we're looking at this idea of maintaining confidentiality. We want you to keep the lessons with you, but the private things someone might share as they talk about their truth, we need to keep those here. We'd like to have everyone participate. And so whether you feel more comfortable just at this time popping it into the chat, or if you are so inclined to be willing to speak into the group as we ask for those kind of volunteers, that's awesome. And more importantly, just like your facilitators, we're really going to ask everyone to honor the time. So again, watch and think about being concise with your responses, or try to use our chat feature if there's more that you'd like to say to help keep us engaged. And so our community agreements are just to, again, provide a space so we can have this conversation. So you're looking at the first four, and our next slide had the last three that I just briefly went over, and we'll move on from there. So as we mentioned, we want to get into this topic. So we've taken care of our welcome and introductions, and the rest of the slide just goes into the format in which we have chunked our content. So we're going to obviously be focusing on race. We're going to talk about what it means to center. What are those levels of racism? How do you shift your perspective as you're maybe looking through one particular lens? We'll talk about some educator tips, and then in with some next steps that you can take as soon as you come back from spring break, if you're starting spring break next week, and put them right into your space. And we'll close things out with a way to sign off for not only our series, but your entire series for the session.
Our learning objectives tonight will bring, we're going to learn to constructively talk about race. How do we enter those difficult conversations and create brave spaces? And how can we apply an equity lens to the work we're doing? Because really everything should be driven through an equity lens, and trying to dismantle that opportunity gap we have for our students. We also want to strengthen our ability to take action to advance racial and social justice. And as well as build skills as helping those around us to advance the issues of racial and social justice. Next slide, please. And as we begin our work around these difficult conversations, it's important to remember we need to be mindful of how we're feeling, what space we're existing in, what is our body's response to the discomfort. When we walk into these moments, we need to be able to take a breath and stop. What are we feeling? What are we hearing? What is our body responding out? What are our thoughts? Reflect on those. And all in the end, just take deep breaths. It's okay to pause and take a breath and process. Because as we process, then we truly begin to listen, and we truly begin to break down the thoughts. Yep, reflection is important. Next slide, please.
So let's jump into it. We're going to set the stage. And so when we get into the next slide, we're going to dig into a brief video clip. It's about 5 minutes, and we're going to ask you to have a response after viewing the video. So our video is called Let's Talk.
Let's talk about race. In order to have a productive conversation and deepen the interracial dialogue around race, there are some agreements and conditions to understand. The first agreement is to stay engaged. Be an active participant in the conversation and listen to what others have to say. Be okay with experiencing discomfort. Conversations about race are hard, so this is normal. And don't be afraid to ask questions. Every one of us is at a different level, and each one of us has a different understanding. But don't let the discomfort shut you down. Use it to learn and grow.
Speak your own truth. Speak from your own personal experiences. Tell your own stories. Understand that your truth may be different from others, and that's okay. Expect and accept non-closure. It is likely that you will leave this conversation with more questions than when you entered. The goal is to start a dialogue about race so that you can go home and continue it, go to work and continue it. Continue it wherever you can and encourage conversation. With this, understanding will grow.
Now let's go over a couple of conditions and goals for this conversation. Number 1, focus on your own truth. Stay personal, local, and immediate. This means using the I pronoun when talking about race. Focus on your own personal experiences.
Number 2, isolate the topic of race. As humans, it is natural for us to derail and start our own path. Don't do this. We're here to talk about race and race only.
Now let's get into what race is exactly.
Race is a socially constructed division of mankind and classification of modern human based on various physical characteristics and shared culture. But today, let's define race as the color of our skin, because after all, what do teachers see when they look out into the classroom? Race may seem unimportant, but it's something that's prevalent in our society today. It affects everyone, both positively and negatively. So why are conversations about race important?
Because I want to feel comfortable talking about my culture with other races than what I'm mixed with.
Because even though it's awkward to talk about it, if we never talk about it, the situation's never going to change.
Because every student needs to be educated at the same level as everybody else, no matter the color of their skin.
Because we don't live in a melting pot, we live in a salad bowl. And with that diversity, we have stereotypes and misunderstandings.
Because of my own comfort and discomfort in different educational settings as a person of color.
Because when I try to talk about race in class, students isolate me and belittle me.
Because this is the only hope to change racism in America.
Because in order to change the climate of Grant, we need to start in our classrooms.
Because I think about race every single day and white people don't have to.
Because as a Latina, I've always bore the responsibility of raising the issue of race.
Because as white people, it's time to start recognizing our privileges and stop saying, that's not my problem.
Because we like to pretend we live in a post-racial world, but the very schools we go to and the neighborhoods we live in are based on redlining from the 1950s. We live in a very racial world.
Because.
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 Because. Because. Because.
Thank you. So we're going to just ask for 2 volunteers who would be willing to unmute themselves and respond to the question, why does race matter to you?
Hello, Discover Card
Hello?
here to explain
I don't
our
think I can hear
cashback
that.
match. We match all of the
Oh,
cashback you earn at the end of your first
what
year
was that?
automatically. It's that simple. Discover. Exceptionally common sense. Learn more at discover.com/.
My apologies. There you go. You guys are back.
No worries. Now, Jennifer, were you wanting to answer that question? Why does race matter to you?
I was, but the cashback threw me off. So race matters to me as a African American teacher. I teach in a predominantly suburban environment. I'm the only African American teacher at my school currently. So race matters to me because I feel like for me, I'm an advocate for a lot of minorities in my building, a lot of the minority students, things like that. So race matters to me on more of a personal level, and it matters for me as far as being like the advocate basically for my students who don't really have a voice or feel unheard, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense, and I'm so glad that you shared that. Very much like you, I work in a predominantly white area. I'm often the first Black teacher kids would have. So I figured you were representing. So thank you for sharing your personal story about why race matters to you. Can I have a second volunteer?
Hi, my name's Jacqueline. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you guys. Race matters to me because it matters to, I want to say to society, and in every space that I am, I'm an African American woman, educated, I'm a cognitive impairment specialist, and yet and still sometimes, I guess it's just I'm not gonna say the norms of society, but sometimes you feel you're still not, you're not up to par, especially if you're working in the suburban area and living in the suburban area. I live in Royal Oak, and all around me there's signs, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. But you still unfortunately, you run into some racism. So it matters to me because it does matter as I navigate life as an African American woman. I thank God I'm an African American woman, but yeah, that's why.
Jacqueline, thank you for sharing as well. The volunteers obviously had very personal connection to this work, and we want to recognize that each of us have a different way in which we connect and have our other reasons why it matters to us, and that's why you're here. So we appreciate the two volunteers and all of you for being here tonight. And Carrie's going to move us into the vision from NEA.
So as we're looking at our vision, thank you, Iris, for bringing this conversation into the room about why it's important to talk about race. It's important because we need to advocate for all of our educational professionals and gather us and unite so that we can fulfill the true promise of the public education, that is every student gets what they need inside of our classrooms, inside of our buildings, on our buses, in our cafeterias, on the playgrounds. They have an opportunity, an equal opportunity to take the courses that their heart is set on, to learning paths that they want. And it will take a collective action to make the changes we need to make on the face of the educational system. Next slide, please. And as
so we recognize that each of you are here tonight because you're somewhere on this continuum. You are maybe at that beginning stage and you're still developing your awareness. You recognize things aren't good, you know that things can be better. And so you're developing more learning. Some of us are capacity building tonight. We've got that foundational piece, but now we're really looking to deepen our understanding so that we can do more with it, so that we're heading towards the last part of the continuum, and that's that action stage. And so that our advocacy is not just our words, but it's our actions, and we get those changes that are needed for both our students and staff. And so throughout the night, I'm hoping you'll see connections to this framework and recognizing you may be at different stages of this framework based on the content that we're talking about today.
And this is me where we're going to talk about just this video. I want you to watch it, and then we'll have a little conversation about what we just saw and experienced.
Hi, I'm Marley Dias. I'm 11 years old. A lot of grown-ups think that opportunities exist for all kids, and all we need to do is apply ourselves. But I know that's just not true. It shouldn't matter if you live in the city or suburbs, on a farm or a reservation, or what your zip code may be, but it does. There's still rules to keep our schools separate and unequal. Why? We spend a lot of time talking about whether what someone says or does is racist, but that's not enough. You not liking me for the color of my skin is not the only thing that can affect my chances for success. I'm talking about the built-in barriers that keep me and other kids from reaching our full potential. It's all around us. We might not recognize it, even when it's right under our noses. Like, remember that time I had to start a campaign just to get books in my library about kids who look like me? Do you care enough to look closer, to talk to each other, to your students, to your communities? We've got to change the dialogue. Because when we do, you'll be amazed by all we can accomplish. I'm looking at you.
So just take a moment, close your eyes if you need to, or take a breath, and then think, what would a great public school look like? So what will you see in the schools? What will it feel like? How will you feel when you walk through the doors, or you look through the classroom windows or in the cafeteria? And what would it sound like? What are you going to hear? What noises? What activity? So take a moment, reflect on that, and then we'll ask, you can put your answers in the chat, as well as have a couple of people speak out into the room of what the school will look like, feel like, and sound like. Most definitely, Wendy. Safe and able to learn. Be themselves. One thing I didn't share about in my introduction is I work in in-school suspension. So I am dealing with the students that often are being disciplined and they're often struggling. And it is because they can't find themselves. They don't see themselves in their education. So it's so important that we're recognizing that and bringing that up, that we need to be able to see ourselves within our educational systems. And for so long, our BIPOC, our Black, Indigenous, people of color, our students, our BIPOC students have not always had someone to see themselves through their eyes that is a reflection of who they are. So it's really important that we build up that diversity. Caring and challenging, feel loved, equal access for all, understanding all students. New buildings with the supplies and equipment like the suburban schools. Yes, Melissa, I just spent an all-day training in building or breaking down systemic racism, a trauma healing approach. And it was, that's what we talked about right there, is that generational damage that has been done. Generational damage. And how do we bring the joy back into the schools, the joy of learning, the opportunities, so that we can overcome the damage that has been done, that Iris will talk about later as we're looking at the systems of racism. And as we move into our next slide, Iris is going to take us into how are we centering race in our classrooms and educational spaces. Thank you everyone for sharing in the chat.
Okay, thank you, Carrie. So we are going to move into that first chunk, centering race. So as we move into the content, we just want to again ground ourselves, because we're recognizing that people may be anywhere on that continuum. So we don't take any assumptions about this work. And so we want to start by reminding or informing us that race is not scientifically real. We want to remember that this is something that was created in a way to allow the sectioning of people basically on the purposes for economic, political, and social reasons. And we know that, again, has no other basis than to allow one group to be superior and create systems that allow other groups not to have the same access and environment as the superior group. And some of you already were starting to identify that by even talking about the schools you believe should look, feel, and sound like. So when we define racism, we look at racism as a series of equations, so to speak. And so when we really get down to it, it's a collection of things that really break down into two big pieces, prejudice and power. But when you think about prejudice and power, it really looks at those pieces as outlined on the slide. So we're looking at systems, we're looking at power, we're looking at white supremacy. And we do want to, again, put up front that we are not identifying and saying people are white supremacists. We are indicating white supremacy is a structure or a system that, again, allows for that unequal treatment of others based solely on a social construct. And so we want to just make sure that we recognize that we're talking about systems and barriers and not identifying people and putting labels that, again, create opportunities that prevent us from having the real conversations. And another way I like to talk about it is, the system is so around us, it's like a fish in water. You're swimming all the time and you don't even see it anymore. So sometimes we have to slow down and really identify it and pick it apart so that we can talk about the system and not talk about people as individuals, which moves us into the levels of racism. So we look at levels of racism from two silos. We talk about individualism and systemic. And so within those two silos, we break it down into two further pieces. And so we'll go to the next set of slides that will take us through all four parts. So our internalized racism looks at, again, the racism we think about which lies within us. And so we think about those concepts that we are often taught or modeled that we just adapt because at the time we're not aware of what these things might be. And so the examples are listed there below. And so we, again, just take those pieces that have been a part of private belief systems. So those are those things that we have on the inside. So when we move from internalized racism, we talk about interpersonal. And this is, again, where we're talking about between individuals, where I'm taking time to identify and point out something about others or a group of others. And so again, we have some examples there. And as Chad had put out for all of us at the beginning, these are those pieces that, again, ground us in what we're seeing right now, even as we look at the current situation with our Supreme Justice process, as we're watching the conversations that are coming out. And we're seeing a lot of interpersonal racism as they're pointing out pieces that have nothing to do with the work of a Supreme Court judge. So those are if interpersonal and individual are examples of individualized, then we get into institutional racism, which as educators, we spend a lot of time recognizing as we look at our systems that are put forth that create unfair policies and practices that our students and ourselves have to live with. And we want to work on figuring those things out to make things more just, right, and
I think Iris might have frozen, or did I freeze?
No, Iris just froze. You can probably pick it up from there.
I can. So when we're talking about, thank you, Chad. We're talking about that institutional racism. We're looking at the structures within schools. So like we were just talking about, and it was brought up in the chat about how having the suburbs by Melissa, the suburbs having the tax base to support buying school supplies and to support building new buildings that give them learning spaces. Students in this time frame, in this generation, need to have so that they can be prepared for their futures. We're really looking at putting these, I love the idea behind the Teach Grants, which is that it says we're going to help get educators into schools and help them pay for their debt. But what they're doing is they're taking these inexperienced educators and placing them inside schools that have the highest needs, which tend to also be the highest population of BIPOC students. So our students of color, well, yes, they have passionate educators and educators that want to be in the work. Oftentimes, they're also the least experienced. So they don't have developed toolboxes to deal with some of the larger societal issues that are crushing down on the school. And I see Iris back, so Iris will take us into the next level of racism.
Gotta enjoy unstable internet. So our last section is structural racism. And so as Carrie was describing, when we look at institutional, this is where we look at those pieces that are, again, across institutions and the greater society as a whole. And so when we think about redlining and we think about activities that, again, we talked about, some of you put into the chat about, schools who are, again, are more culturally based, maybe more white, more, and not that diverse piece that we know helps all of us live and grow. And so this is, again, looking at the piece across a bigger section or a bigger piece of our community. So we want to, again, think about how this is where we want to focus our work and not focus on the individual side. We really want to focus our work, speaking too fast tonight, on our structural side. So our next slide, again, just gives us some more clear ideas, examples of where we can find it. So I'm going to give a moment of pause, give people a chance to take a view. There's quite a few words on the screen. So these are, again, systems that are oppressive, whether they're intentional or unintentional. And anytime we notice and we feel differences that are not right or fair, we need to be thinking about what level of racism are we actually operating in.
And I'll just share real quickly on this point right here. I'm actually speaking to you from a community right near Idlewild, Michigan. And if you're not familiar with Idlewild, Michigan, you should go ahead and Google it. And Idlewild, Michigan is a rural community in northern Michigan that is literally full of Black people. And the reason, of course, is that home ownership and property ownership, redlining, as we discussed earlier, was prevalent in, Detroit, Chicago, a lot of those areas where, as the Great Migration northward was occurring, those families and those that were, entering into that middle class strata didn't have a place to vacation, didn't have, those sorts of opportunities. And that's why this community here existed, because there were a couple land developers, a couple white fellas, decided that they would capitalize on this kind of gap in opportunity, and sold a lot of properties for Black families here in Idlewild. And so much of the Black intellectual groups class would be here, like, for instance, W.E.B. Du Bois would vacation here. Malcolm X and his family, Malcolm X's sister had a store here. My father did painting, did mural work for them. All of the Motown greats would have vacation properties here. And so the very fact that this place exists, and the very fact that I am speaking to you from this place in the country, so when you drive up M37, all of a sudden you're going to see Black people, and it's going to surprise that's why I kind of explain it. But the reason that it's here, and this is a great community, by the way, but the reason that it is here is because of this institutionalized racism, which existed far before I was ever on this planet, and continues to impact both, myself and those who live here to this day.
That's really important to notice, because we're going to move into implicit bias, Chad, and that's a great way segue into here is the biases that had to go into place so that neighborhoods were sequestered. Basically, they're saying this neighborhood has high value, so we're going to keep that value and that generational wealth with our white families. We don't want to allow people of color to move in because it's going to lower our property values. Where did that start? It started with a prejudice, something that said this particular part of the population is less than, is not safe. All these other words that we think and we hear that are derogatory towards people of color. And then it ends up going not just that prejudice and that inclination, because that's internal. Those are based off of lived experiences, things we hear through the media, things that we read in the paper, conversations we hear walking down the streets, experiences that our family shows us while we're living. There's these stereotypes that affect it, and we don't always know that we have them within us. Every single one of us has biases. Some keep us safe, some are positive, help us in a positive life. The ones we're looking at here, though, are the ones that negatively impact others. These are the ones that, if we act upon them, they're going to cause students to be disciplined disproportionately. They're going to remove opportunities for other students, because we say, like particularly Black male students, they are suspended regularly and thrown into special education programs because they don't fit in the white culture of a classroom. So instead of getting to know the need of the student, a lot of educators will punish or push into special ed. That's damaging to that student because that's a decreasing opportunities. And I also want to say, in my building, one of the issues we have with biases, and this is something that frustrates me, is when we talk about the achievement gap, it is not an achievement gap. It is an opportunity gap. How are we increasing opportunities for students so that they can achieve at their best self level, right? One of the things my school is very proud of is that we offer a lot of AP courses. We looked, though, at the enrollment, and this is a trend you'll find across the nation. We found fewer students of color have access to highly capable programs, pre-AP courses and AP courses and honor courses in their early academic years. So as they get into the high school in the later years and they may be interested in AP, they're having to take 2 and 3 AP classes at the same time so that they can keep up with their white counterpart students who've had access to these programs for a very long time. So when you hear, this is my challenge to you, when you hear that, oh, we have students of color of AP, look, they're taking 2 and 3 AP courses, push back and say, well, what are our white students doing? How many of those courses are they having to take at the same time because they weren't afforded opportunities early? And that's what we're looking about in bias, is that's how that plays out in a classroom setting. It's like Chad's reading my mind. I love it. We're expressing explicitly and acting upon this information we have in our system that we didn't even know we had, right? Property manager, here's the examples about the property manager doing criminal background checks on Latinos than whites. He or she may not notice that trend, but someone else could come in and say, hey, did you happen to notice this is what you got going on? And then, so at that point, that person has the option of saying, oh, I need to be aware of that and I need to stop. Or he can move into the explicit state where it's like, well, I just want to make sure that we do not get people of color in my particular complex. That's very much what redlining was about right there, keeping people out. Yes, biases, students not welcome in class. We need to give grace to our students in understanding and empathy and welcome all students regardless of their background into our educational spaces. On the next slide, we're going to go into a little more conversation about implicit bias in the press. When you look at this picture, you see 2 sets of young men. One is white, the other are men of color. These white college students are presented as clean cut. They're in ties, they're in suits. There's just the idea that they might be guilty of this. The next slide is of the Black men who are not presented the same way, assumed guilty, that they're wrong. When you see these pictures of Sports Illustrated, 2 amazing tennis players, this just really bothers me because she herself, Kornikovia, is an amazing tennis player, yet the focus is on her femininity, her sexual appeal as a woman. And then you look over here and you see, hey, this guy, Sports Illustrated, he's actually doing the sport. So what message is this sending to our young women and young men? And in the next slide, we're going to look at another example about the American Red Cross in an advertisement they did. And I want to say it's 2016 or 2017, but it's rather recent. This was their advertisement on how to describe the rules of being in pool, the pool safety rules. Take a minute, look at this. And if someone could either put in the chat or unmute and tell me what you see in this in 2017, contemporary times. What is this slide showing and depicting? Yep. The rules are being broken by people of color. Correct, Crystal. And the Emily, the only good kids are white and the bad kids are black. That's right. That is exactly what this advertisement is. There's so many other ways they could have done, so many ways of done to, I'm sorry, I saw a message in the chat and I got distracted. So many ways to ascribe these rules without bringing in those racial biases. Yes, I see you, Vishan. Ooh, I hope I didn't say that.
That was correct. Thank you. So in this conversation today, I was looking through a magazine and there was an ad there. There was a beautiful Black woman laying on the couch and she had this beautiful outfit on, but the ad was for a company saying that now you could rent clothing that would make you look like this. And so to me, it was like, so what are you saying? Black women can't afford to purchase these things because you have a Black woman in a Caucasian magazine with this outfit on saying, if you want to rent these clothes, you can do this. So I was kind of offended by that. So actually, I emailed the company and let them know in a very nice manner how I felt about that.
Mm-hmm. Did you get a response?
No, not yet.
Oh, well, good for you for saying, because their intent might have been, we want to help you expand your wardrobe, but the impact to you was, you're saying, I can't do this on my own. You think less than I am. And that's the part we need to hold on to as a society, is that impact of those words and those actions. Thank you so much for bringing that into this space, because that leads right into this. There are those unconscious associations. They might not even have known that it would have drawn that experience from you, Vishan. They could have not known that at all. Implicit bias affects everything we do, where we sit, where we go to lunch, what side of the street we walk down, what kind of cars we drive. We could all look, if we look at our behaviors and what we do on the regular, we could learn about our own biases that way. Another great way is to go to Harvard's Project Implicit, spend some time with their little surveys and learn about, explore what possible biases you can have, and think to yourself, how is this impacting my ability to equitably and consciously make solid choices? Yes, they do. These decisions to print is conscious, because here's what happens. If we are not aware of these conscious decisions that are being made by others, we're going to start perpetuating that cycle. So yeah, we started with this bias, but now we're going to bring it out to the world, right? And so then we speak it out to the world, and it has power and it has energy and it moves it forward. And we end up with all these things you see on the slide: tracking the SPED students, lack of opportunity in advanced courses, disproportionate discipline. I mean, come on, we know for a fact our highly disciplined students are our students of color. For the longest time, it was our male students, our Black male students. I'm seeing data now that says the trend is changing to the Black female student, who is being disciplined even more because they are considered aggressive when they want to talk. They're pushing forward their agenda and not taking the punishment the system wants to give them. And I paused when I said that, because discipline is teaching through a behavior, not punishing. And if we take the time to get to know our students, we hear them, we see them, we champion them, we begin to be able to truly discipline and teach them how they can make changes in their life to have the opportunities they want. And it's incredibly important to remember that. is we have to take the time to stop and know our students. If we don't, they will not be able to bloom and blossom and grow, and this cycle of generational poverty and racism is going to continue. We have a video here we're going to watch. It's a very powerful video. As you watch it, see what sticks out to you. Resonate on what you're seeing and experiencing, and then we'll do a little debrief after.
All rise.
This video is very powerful. For me, what sticks out is I think this gentleman who's experiencing all these microaggressions, all these examples of bias, prejudice, discrimination, stereotyping, structural racism, interpersonal racism. And yet every day he gets up, walks into that courtroom, sits on the bench, and faces people who may have been the perpetrators of all of these actions. And he has to remain neutral and not bring that anger and hurt into the work he's doing. And that's hard. What resonated with some of you? You feel free to put it in the chat if someone would like to share with something that stood out to them in this particular video before I share the other one that really sticks out that's important to me. I want to hear what's important to you, what you saw, what you feel. Exactly. It is every day. It's real and it's insidious. Yeah, you don't belong here. It's very powerful.
I also wanted to comment as a parent and grandparent that you're very aware that you have to teach your children about microaggressions so they're not broken, but there's always that little piece of concern or even fear that something catastrophic will happen because of the looks received.
You're spot on with that. So much comes from these looks and these microaggressions that just keep, it was described today in the seminar that I was in that just really kind of resonated with me, is that it's like just getting a scratch, like a cat scratch, right? Not very deep to begin with, but it's consistent and constant until one day you finally look down and you see all the scars. And that was very visual for me when I heard the trainer explain it that way to me. The other thing this video points out to me is when you're driving down the road and the woman rolls the window up because she sees who her child is speaking to. Right there, she's beginning to teach her child to hate. There are two emotions that need to be taught: hate and empathy. And as educators, it's our job to teach that empathy for one another. And talking about race and the impacts of bias and racism in our school buildings is how we're going to start building that empathy, grace, and understanding for each other. Iris is going to take us into the shifting perspective section. And I just want to thank everyone for being brave and sharing your thoughts. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carrie. So to shift perspectives, as I mentioned earlier, we want to move away from looking at individual racism into the structural racism. And the best way to do that actually is the video that we're going to prep and show you real quick.
Moving the race conversation forward. You've probably noticed that when our news media talks about race, when they talk about racism, when they talk about racial justice issues, they quite often talk about it all wrong. But have you ever tried to quantify exactly how and why the media gets it wrong about race and what we can do to fix it? Well, there's a new paper published by Race Forward entitled Moving the Race Conversation Forward that sets out to do just that by compiling nearly 1,200 articles from major newspapers and cable news outlets and systematically breaking down the most common mistakes we fall into when we talk about race. And in their research, Race Forward identified 7 harmful practices, the 7 most common bad habits in media coverage of race, as well as recommended strategies to get us back on track. And I recommend reading all 7 for yourself, but right now I want to focus on just one of the biggest traps that racial justice conversations fall into, which is our tendency to focus too much on individuals instead of systems. Because when we talk about race, when we talk about racism, when we talk about racial justice, it's important to remember that there are levels to this thing. There are at least 4 different levels of racism that each need to be considered. The first level is internalized racism, which is all the prejudice, bias, and blind spots you might have within yourself as an individual. The next level after that is interpersonal racism, which is what happens when we act out that internalized racism on each other. Those 2 levels, the internalized and the interpersonal, are the 2 individual levels of racism. And those are the simplest ones to focus on, the easiest to recognize in our day-to-day lives, the ones we spend most of our time talking about, but I'm here to tell you, there's something else. Systemic racism. Once you get past those individual levels, first of all, you have to deal with institutional racism. The racist policies and discriminatory practices in schools and workplaces and government agencies that routinely produce unjust outcomes for people of color. And when you step beyond that level, you have structural racism, the unjust, racist patterns and practices that play out across the institutions that make up our society. The individual and systemic levels of racism are both important, both necessary to reckon with, and they're both usually interrelated. But if you want a real, fully clear-sighted conversation on racial justice, you have to be talking about both levels. And one of the most common ways we fail to see the big picture on race is by failing to think about systemic racism, by failing to be systemically aware. In their research, Race Forward found that our media coverage far too often falls into that trap. They found that approximately 2/3 of race-focused media coverage fails to consider how systemic racism factors into the story. 2/3 of their coverage of race fails to be systemically aware. And that is a problem. When we constantly focus only on individual stories, it distorts our sense of how racism works. It encourages us to see racism only as the product of overt, intentional racist acts by individuals that can be fixed simply by shaming and correcting those individual defects. And it encourages us to see individual stories of transcending racism as proof that there is no more racism. That if we have a black president and Oprah is a billionaire, then there must not be anything else to talk about. And any problems that other people of color still face must be due to deficiencies on their part. It must be a problem with them instead of a problem with the system. And that is no, just no. We cannot have a real, thorough conversation about incarceration rates for people of color, about the thousands of families torn apart by our immigration policies, about the perennial disparities in education, housing, healthcare, employment opportunities. We cannot have real talk about any of the biggest issues that affect us all as individuals if we are not also thinking about the systems involved. We cannot have a discourse that brings us closer to racial justice without being systemically aware. So next time you listen to the news or read the news or watch the news or surf the news, you should take a minute to ask yourself, is this coverage systemically aware? And read Race Forward's new research paper entitled Moving Our Race Conversation Forward for more on these issues and for intervention strategies to help us have some real talk about racial justice.
All right, so as this video comes to a stop,
Iris, you're muted, sweetheart.
I tried to take the mute off, sorry about that. I put it in the chat anyway. As we start to talk about shifting perspectives, if you have a reaction, I would encourage you to try to put it in 3 words to the video as we talk about being systemically aware. And ways we want to have you start to think about that, we want to start thinking about how we change our perspectives from the way in which we simply ask questions. So we're looking at 4 ways we typically ask questions, and how can we ask the same information but get that different solution that we're looking for, a different way to have people respond. We know shame and blame doesn't get at it. A lot of times, again, we have to ask questions that help people get at that awareness level, their own awareness level, help them understand where they might be, where they may get information from, and how can we move their thinking forward. So we just wanted to have you think about that piece as you think about all of this, because there's a lot of work to do, and we need to think about where we're at on that framework so that we know where we're going to direct our next steps in our attention. So this first slide just gives us an opportunity to think about how to ask questions differently. Our next slide looks at some other strategies that we can use to also address racism. And these strategies, again, are aligned with the 4 types of racism. So when we look at those strategies, again, depending on where you might be on that continuum, we strongly suggest that you look at ways to do an and, it's a both and and thing, because again, it's easy to focus on the top, but we also want to look at how we could have impact on the 2 at the bottom. So as you're looking at where you might be, what might, first of all, impact you personally, because this work is always about self-growth, so that we can, again, make an impact across our systems, our classrooms, and in our communities as well.
And now we're going to move into racial justice. And what we need to keep in mind is, as we're doing this work of cultural competency and of dismantling the white supremacy culture and creating new systems and new structures to support and to embed racial justice in everything we do, we have to keep in mind that this is a journey without a final destination. While we are aiming to achieve racial justice, we will never be fully competent, because there will always be a situation, there will be a person, there will be a culture, a community that we come across that we're going to need to learn about, that can shove us back and forward along the continuum of awareness, knowledge, skills, and advocacy. As long as we are continuing to do the work with an open heart and open mind, that journey will continue to teach us and grow us and build our communities. Our ultimate step is to create the systemic fair treatment of people of all races that results in equitable opportunities and outcomes for everyone. Notice this says equitable, not equal. Equitable. We need to meet our students where they are and provide them with what they need to be their best self, fertilize their soils and their gardens so they grow, bloom, and blossom into the beautiful beings that they are intended to be. We'll start by, in our next slide, talk about how it all starts with changing hearts and minds one at a time. Once we change our heart and mind and we get it and we put that intention out that we want to create these more equitable systems for our students, we want to teach our students to be able to speak and see with one another. When we're dealing with discipline, we want to be able to have an open heart and open mind to change behavior and hear the stories of our students. All too often I hear educators complaining to me in my work, why doesn't this student just take the punishment? Why do they have to argue? One of the things as white educators we need to be comfortable with is that discourse over discipline, that conversation, because our students, particularly our students of color, just want you to hear their story and their experience. They're not trying to get out of being disciplined. They're trying to share their side of the story so they can learn and grow, because their heart and mind is trying to change and their behavior. Once our heart and minds and our behavior begin to intentionally and purposefully change, we start changing structures because we start seeing the different ways our students are mistreated, the different ways our students are being disregarded and shut down and not offered these opportunities, because we all started with that heart and our mind wanting to change the world. And as we move forward, Iris is going to take us into the next steps. That's right.
So
yes,
as we mentioned,
or Chad, yes.
Yeah. So as we mentioned earlier, as we went down the agenda, these are next pieces are things that you can actually take right into your classroom as soon as you return from spring break, if you are already planning to take some time away. And so as this next slide comes up, there are 5 items, and we're just going to populate those right in so that we're looking at all 5 of them, because we want to talk about how easy it is to choose something that we can try. You know, number 1 seems so basic, but sometimes we forget how important it is to do regularly and be consistent about it. It isn't just something we do as we transition at the beginning of the school year, but that should be something that kids can predict every day, that they're going to be greeted and welcomed into a classroom space. Looking again at some of these pieces being individual things that you can do and try. These are, again, basic items, and a resource that these have come from we'll be sharing with you as well, so that you can dig a little deeper and learn a little bit more about it. But as you look, the more you go down the list, the more we're asking you to take risks and to try things out. We know you're going to make mistakes because we're human, but the more we can model and the more that we can, again, embed ourselves in the work, the more likely we're going to, again, create that space that our kids feel safe, can talk about it. And this is true for all teachers. It isn't just a white teacher thing. We have kids in our classroom who, again, are impacted by the things that we're working through to remove and dismantle the white supremacist structures that we are also dealing with. And so as you look at 6 through 10, again, those are those pieces that we can do each as individuals. Take one at a time. This isn't something you want to try to do to all 10 at once, but look for ways in which you can naturally embed them into the ways in which you do business.
One thing I want to just point out real quick is right here in the first set. And I know for educators, this is a very difficult and dangerous place to have conversations, in terms of your employment. And I would encourage folks to practice first. Practice with trusted adults, like family members, like colleagues, like folks that you can, talk about these issues and just hear yourself saying it, and practice here, with the terms and the phrases and the what ifs and the rebuts and all of the types of, scenarios that you really are going to be worried about when you're into a classroom and you're with real kids who are going to ask unpredictable questions, right? And so I would really encourage you to really practice this with a trusted group of friends, family, or other colleagues, and when you feel comfortable, when you feel like you are ready to introduce these types of topics, and you've practiced some techniques in terms of how to respond and how to speak on it, then that might be a better time. Carrie.
I just quickly want to follow up with what you're saying, Chad, because you're right on. We do need to practice. We need to take it that next step, though, and as adults in our building, have these conversations with each other in the building. So once you've gone and you've gone to that trusted individual who can help you build this skill, bring it school-wide, building right. Have these conversations. Find out how the adults in the building are treating each other, because that's going to be a direct reflection in how your students treat each other. So if you
Mark brought up something really interesting in the chat. He says, but they think the same way I do, right? Like, so like you may not have at arm's reach, like a real diverse group of colleagues or individuals, at ready access. I get it. I live in the country, right? So I would just suggest, this is one of those deals where you really, everybody knows a person, right? Everybody, I think that's generally true. This is one of those moments when you have to maybe extend yourself a little bit, kind of tippy toe into that pool a bit, and just ask, say, hey, can I run something past you real quick? I've been trying to, do X, Y, and Z, or I've been trying to learn more how to speak on this kind of issues, and I need another ear. I need another perspective. Would you be willing to do that for me? And I think the act of asking and that extending that kind of like vulnerability, right, is super important, and it allows for trust to occur. You're asking. And I think that's one way that you can address that, Mark.
Mark, I hear your second thing, and Chad, you're right to step out and ask, but Mark, you bring up a valid point. You can't, your awareness, if everyone thinks and experiences life the same way you do, yeah, you're going to share that similar experience. We all don't walk life the same though. Even your friends and your family that you think are experiencing the same, they have experiences that you don't know about that they can bring in and will shape these conversations. And then I would also challenge you to look outside of your circle and reflect upon your own choices. Make some intentional, we call them choice points. What are you intentionally choosing to learn about other cultures? Like, what music are you exploring? What foods are you exploring? What books are you reading? What news stations are you listening to? These are all simple ways to start building awareness within yourself so that you can bring it to these conversations with people that are very similar to you and start expanding your conversations. And then as a group, grow and be able to have a comfortable conversation at your level, but recognize no matter who you're talking to, there's going to be discomfort, because that's how we learn. We learn when we are discomfort.
Okay, so I want to just kind of back to this too, because the thing I want to point out, and this is a conversation that the facilitators are having right now, this is about self-work too. So keep in mind that we all, like our classrooms, kids learn at different rates. This set of tips is really about your learning. And so what we don't want to get in the habit of is comparing ourselves to our other colleagues and peers. This is about you modeling for students and you doing your work. So we call it that mirror work, and this is what those tips are really about. And your mirror is more reflected with our students and then with our colleagues, because our students are what we're here for and what we come first with. So what I would stress to Mark and anyone who's having this thinking, think about the work you want to do for you, because that's what it is. And you don't have to be the expert because you're the classroom teacher or the adult in the space. Carrie?
Chad, was there something you wanted to add before we move into this slide?
Oh, well, if we have time, I'll be very brief. So Mark actually brings up that idea that, that I think we all suffer from, like all white people are alike. It's not true. As a UD, I had an experience where I walked into a bus garage. I represent a lot of employees, right? I walk into the bus garage. They look. This is in the country. They got they got the hats, the coveralls, the whole bit. And I just assumed, I assumed I was walking into a certain kind of situation that with folks who had a certain kind of perspective. I could not have been more wrong completely. And I always reflect on that experience that these cats were nothing like I had assumed. They were my favorite. They were my favorite people. And so I just, this idea that, yeah, well, it's just all white people around here. Well, all white people are alike. That's just like, all black people are alike. So I just wanted to point that out too.
And that's important to bring up. It really is. And that comes from, we all walk life differently. We all live life. And that is a great example of what individual racism is if you don't stop those assumptions that you're just talking about, like Chad was just sharing with us, then it begins to perpetuate and build these systems that are harming. You know, we see 7 harmful factors that we're saying racism exists within individuals. Bias exists within individuals. Racism is systemic. Racism is insidious. It is underlying everything we do, and we are all impacted by racism. As we talk about the next slide about what we can do, we want to really be thinking about, as we're starting to break down these systems, that we're careful when we're using data. People will use data to frame in any way possible to make something work. You know, we really want to be scrutinizing the data we're using, and we want to see the trends over time, not with one student, but with all of our student body. We want to look over time, what's going on in our building. We also want to include not just that quantitative data, we want qualitative data. We want to get student voice, find opportunities for students to express their experiences in your school buildings, on your buses, in the cafeterias. Talk about their home lives. What are they experiencing in the community? Bring that voice to the space. That is an important data point that can help guide you in this work to break down these inequitable systems. You know, and you're right, Mark, people do take offense by little things. And that's why it's so cool that you're here on this journey and you're brave enough to bring to the space your questions and your perspective. You know, I can't let you know how much I honor that and appreciate it. And as we move into the next slide, I think that it's more on what we can do. We can take some courses. NEA has Ed Justice, the Center for Social Justice. They have 1,000,001 resources for you. You can also go and look at Race Forward. I put the link in there. Abolitionist Teaching Network, all of these different things that you can explore to get more resources on how do we build these courageous conversation protocols. And it's important you use protocols or agreements and not norms. Norms are rooted in white supremacy culture. We want to use agreements because that's what, when we use the word agreements and protocols and things, we're saying we're all coming to this together, and we're saying we can do this as a community, as individuals trying to create a more just world for one another. If you'd like to learn more about how to confront white nationalism in schools, the Western State Center has a toolkit that talks about what is white supremacy culture, what is white nationalism, and how do they differ, and how are these groups infiltrating our schools? Because this is what we have to remember. To break down a system that has been here longer than any of us in this space combined, we need to go back to the grassroots. And we need to understand how the individuals that want to continue to perpetuate these systems are thinking and working. Eurydice, I see you unmuted. Yes, your turn. You see that you unmuted.
So the tools for the journey, as was already mentioned by Carrie, they look like this. I sometimes like to know where I can find items. And so the, for instance, the 10 educator tools comes from the middle document, Racial Justice and Education. And so all of these items are here for our purpose, use as individuals, use with other colleagues. But the most important thing is decide where you want to start. And we want to give you some practical things that you can take away and be able to implement right from the start. So keep in mind that we want to remind you that these pieces are to help us stay engaged, help us to learn to speak our truth, even when it's uncomfortable, and to recognize that this is not going to give us every answer. So we're going to have some disclosure, because some non-closure, excuse me. Because the goal of this work is to really develop our sense of self so that we can help better the next generation. And worrying about how to get started is where we want to give you some ideas with the tools that we're sharing here tonight. So as we ask at the end of this journey, we'd like to have people think about, there's a lot of information and an hour and a half can go by very, very quickly. So we ask you to think about what's one thing that you may walk away with from tonight that you're going to take back into the spaces where you serve students. If you would be willing to pop it into the chat, that's fabulous. If we could have at least one person, maybe someone who hasn't been brave enough yet to put their voice into the space, would be willing to unmute and talk about the one commitment that they're going to walk away with tonight. We don't want you to have, lesson plans and full answers. We just want you to think about those pieces that you know that you can do, that one thing, that one step that may move you forward on your journey.
Mhm. Yeah, the Harvard, nice. Checking your personal
That is
back.
an interesting site too, because there's several different tests you can take on that when you go there. So it's not just about race. It has implicit bias, towards gender and all the other roles. So there's all sorts of tests you can take, and you'll be fascinated. And maybe you might even like what you find out.
I'd like to share one thing, if that's okay. With where I get my resources and the idea of thinking about systems versus individuals, I'd like to reanalyze where my books come from. Where does my materials come from? Who gave input to what materials I am presenting to my students? I think that's a place for me to start.
For sure.
Thank you, Kelsey. I'm so glad that you put your voice in this space, because we hadn't heard from you tonight. And it's a great place to start. Look at where do our tools come from that we use with our students? Absolutely.
Those are also really great non-confrontational ways to address a very controversial issue, like asking where. Where did this come from? It's very, there's nothing controversial about asking where. Or why? Why is this included? Not like why is this and why is this not? Just say why. And just delving into those questions, even with an individual who may be, vociferously opposed to whatever it is that you're trying to do. Someone said about CRT in the school boards. Asking very simple questions about, well, I see you're concerned about that. What would you want to know about it? They're very simple, but they're so powerful in ways that allow people to be reflective themselves and not feel like they're being attacked, right? You just ask a question. It's very powerful. I say that because obviously in my role and in my kind of job, I have to deal with very controversial situations. So you learn those kinds of skills, but it is a great thing that you should do. Looking into where your materials come from and why they're included.
And understanding the purpose of why you're using the material. What is the lesson you're trying to teach? And are we only focusing on the harms and the trauma of racism? Are we talking about Black joy? Are we talking about Black ingenuity? Are we celebrating linguistic diversity? What are our students seeing in our books? Are they seeing, there's a simple way, first thing you can do is walk into your room, walk into your realms of influence, because ESPs can do this work as well. What are your students seeing on your walls? What are they seeing on the bookshelf? What are they seeing in staff interactions? That will tell you a lot about what the culture is your school building and educational spaces are building up and where you can start. And that is just one of those things that if you just stop and you look and you really reflect on what is currently being presented, you're going to learn a lot about what is not being discussed. And then start framing this work around that, addressing those bravely, those moments. And one of the biggest skills goes right along with what Chad was talking about, but is tell me more. Tell me more. If someone comes to you and says, you know, and this has happened, like, Miss R, I think you're picking on me because I only see you talking to the Black students this week. And unfortunately, that week, it was the same 3 boys I had to talk to 5 times. And so I said, tell me more about why you think that. And we had a conversation and we walked through it because the student didn't see all the stuff in the background that was going on and why those 5 students had to be my students of choice that week. And that's what I call them, my students of choice to love on, because they deserve the best. So.
If you hadn't joined us for some of our previous sessions just in this week, we did a couple other sessions for those who weren't able to join, where they talked about framing things in terms of theme. And so if you're trying to include things into your classroom instructional space, instead of like very obviously introducing, black people into the classroom, which kind of can seem a little bit artificial, right? Framing whatever the topic is in a theme. So if the theme is like, adversity, pottery, whatever it is, right? That allows you to introduce other diverse faces and names into that space in a way that is natural. And that, of course, addresses that other part of kind of systemic and structural and kind of that racism that we kind of like we're taking from, right? Some of the resources that in the structure, in the system, are the ones that are right there at hand. They don't happen to be as diverse as what we would like, right? And so we just perpetuate it. It's not us necessarily, it is the system that we are pulling these resources from. And so if we kind of reframe what we're doing, we could actually create a new structure, right? Without the kind of like a worry that we're being a little bit too on the nose, we're trying too hard, trying to be politically correct or whatever. Like, it's just simply, we're talking about a theme. It just happens to have some black folks, some women, some other folks from other cultures in that montage. And so it's a great way to try that. So if you didn't join us for those sessions, that was one of the techniques that was shared.
And Chad, that reminds me of what a good friend of mine does with, she taught me this, to take these systemic pieces we have to have. We have to have learning objectives. We have to have, goals, and we have to have overarching themes and all of this. So why can't we embed in cultural diversity? Why can't we embed in moments of genius and moments of racial and social justice into our curriculums? Add it in. If it's insufficient, add it in. If you're talking about inventions, find a list. They're everywhere where you can find about Black ingenuity. Doorknobs, something as simple as a doorknob was invented by a Black man. Nobody talks about that. But little things like that you can bring in every day. Like Maya Angelou says, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. So yeah, thank you so much for spending time with us tonight and entering this brave conversation.
Ahead and just unshared, just so that we could kind of all see each other, right before we part. I really wanted to thank you, Carrie, Aris, for presenting this to us. I know that, a lot of us may have, had sessions, similar. We've addressed some of these similar topics. Maybe, some of the vocabulary or the terms are not necessarily new. For some folks, maybe it is new. But what's so important is that we continue to engage and re-engage, right? It's like, I can tell you, I'm 48 years old. I'm still practicing. I'm still trying to get it right, okay? I'm trying to do better. One of these days, I will get it right. And I just want all of you to feel that grace and that opportunity to do the same, right? I mean, the fact that you are here is evidence already of that intent. And now it's just a matter of taking another step and trying a little bit. That is what we do as educators so good, right? I think one of the best things we do as educators is we teach our kids that, number one, it's okay to be a dork, right? Because we're a dork right up there in front of them. It's okay, like how to mess up and how to be nervous, right? I think those are all such great lessons that we do, that we teach our students, and this is just one of the more of those areas where we can kind of help them and model, how we kind of figure this thing out. And so with that, it is 8 o'clock. I thank you so much. I wish I were down there in New Orleans with you, Carrie and Aris. I think there's probably Emily. We could all be down there. Get some gumbo and listen to some music. That'd be great. That'd be great instead of being in the mud and the snow where I'm at right now. But nevertheless, thank you so much all for joining us on this series. I think this is a great way to cap the series. We have a new series coming up last 2 weeks of April. It is all about infusing arts. April is Arts Month, and so we're going to be doing sessions on how you can, even if you're not an art educator, how you can infuse art into your classroom, how you can take some of those topics to address some of the very things that we're talking about right now. So that is that. Any last things that you would like to say, Carrie and Iris, before I release the hounds?
I just wanted to say again, thank you so much, and thanks for being tolerant of the internet connection here, because this has not been a fun evening. And if you have any questions, we did have a slide that has our contact information, so feel free to reach out. And I'm missing the snow right now at home too, so good to see all of you. Enjoy your spring break.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great spring break. Hope to see you back real soon in our next series. Thank you, everybody.
Many blessings to you all. Thank you.
Have fun chilling at home, going to see family, sleeping in, do all those things.
Thank you, Chad. I appreciate you.